a recall or a starter activity. The title bit at the top where it says remote learning would usually be our title and learning objective. And there'd be usually some sort of recall activity. The box you can see on the right is a typical example of some sort of stretch activity that we would use. I'd love it if anybody could attempt that in the next sort of minute or so. But it's based around a thinking hard principle. So in your experience, how does, while we're waiting for everybody to make sure that their bits are in the chat, in your experience, how does that particular picture, so Rembrandt's Christ on the storm, in the storm on the Sea of Galilee, relate to your perspective of remote learning? So if I give us about a minute for that, just to make sure that you put everything in the remote chat, in the chat function, that would be tremendous. And if anybody can move on to the storm in the Sea of Galilee, that would be great. Okay, if you could just finish the chat thing. I tried to make this as modeled as possible for you, because I think it's really important that, number one, I can share practice in this way. And I think the best practice is that's shared. Throughout this, if you've got any questions, please put it in the chat, because if you're thinking it, chances are anybody else will be thinking it as well. And this is sort of really a bit of a way of running us through sort of what's worked for us as far as we're concerned, and how the dynamic has changed because of remote learning. What we found is the principles are the same, so that the principles of a good quality lesson are the same, but how those principles are manifested in a lesson are completely different. So the purpose of this, and I'll go to the objectives in a second, but the purpose of this is for us to sort of discuss, share practice, be real clear, open and honest with people, because we're going to use lots of breakout rooms, because I think it's important that we chat. So who am I? I'm Chris Wallis, the FCCT, for those that don't know, is a fellow of the Chartered College for Teaching. That's you have to provide evidence to the Chartered College to suggest why you should be considered a fellow. I've been teaching for 15 years. I've been senior leadership in a school for 5 years, although sometimes it can seem like 15. Head of PE at a leading sports college for 7 years. Well, I was there for 7 years, but I was head of PE for 3. I was part of the British Council team post-Iraq, to go in and support and raise the quality of PE in Iraq, particularly Erbil. So I work with a number of different schools to try and improve quality of PE. I won an award, fortunately, for gifted and talented provision within PE. And I also am the senior facilitator for UCL, the Institute of Education at UCL, with regards middle leaders and senior leaders awards. So it gives you a flavour of who I am. I'm sorry it sounds like a CV. That's not my intention, but I think it's important that you get to sort of see who I am. The focus of this session is, by the end of it, I hope you will have a very clear outline of the different types of remote learning, because there's lots out there, and all research papers from the Education Endowment Fund seem to suggest that no one type fits all. I'm going to focus quite a lot on synchronous lessons, so live lessons, and how we can make sure that we get the best out of our students. I want us to be able to understand the literature that underpins some of the things that we're going to be talking about, as well as understanding the practical application of that literature, because it's important that we know how to implement it, as well as give us the opportunity to share practice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to arrange you into a breakout room in the next couple of minutes. When I arrange you into a breakout room, can you make sure that you nominate one particular person? That particular person is going to be responsible for sharing your feedback for that group. Can you just introduce yourselves within that group? There's going to be sort of 2 or 3 of you in that group, and just discuss what your experience has been as far as remote learning so far, what has worked, what has not worked, so that we have the opportunity to share practice. If you could, before I arrange you into the breakout rooms, just in the chat, just put a little smiley face or put a hands up or thumbs up icon so that we all know what we're supposed to be doing. But if you're unsure, just feel free to ask. So I'm going to organise you into breakout rooms. Krista, we've got 39, is that right?
Yes, it looks like.
Perfect. So I'm going to arrange you. You're going to have, there's going to be 2 people in each, 1, 2 or 3 people in each of the different groups. So I'm going to create rooms. If you don't know the person, obviously, whatever you say in there is designed to be totally confidential, and an opportunity for us to discuss. So please, please, please just make sure that you discuss openly, because that's the way that we're going to learn. So I'm going to open the groups and I'm going to set no more than 3 minutes for this. Okay, welcome back, everybody. If you can just make sure that you're muted, that would be tremendous. And whoever the nominated person is, if you could just put on the chat one thing that's worked really well regarding online learning so far, that would be great. So whoever the nominated person is, if you could just put on the chat one thing that you've just discussed that worked really, really well. And we're just waiting for the last couple of people. So the nominated person, if we could just make sure that in the chat, you put one particular thing that has worked really well. And I'll touch on those very briefly, although I was gutted because I can't show you because we're using Zoom for those that don't use forms, but they're absolutely incredible. Seminar model. Matthew, in a minute, if you could sort of just touch on what a seminar model is, that would be great. For those that don't know. Self-marking sheets. Live lessons, very interested in primary school, I imagine. So structure and remote learning, as you will know, there are 2 different forms generally. There are synchronous, live lessons, or asynchronous. We prescribe to both in that we deliver live lessons. Students are expected to follow a timetable, their normal timetable. And there's also the remote element as well, in the asynchronous element as well, in as much as all lessons are also uploaded onto a platform we use called Show My Homework, so that the students can still log on later after the lesson has ended to be able to improve their knowledge on a particular bit. The expectation with anything, and anything we do really, is obviously that whatever we're producing is high quality. It's about promoting thinking, and I hope that today will be a way of us as discussing those things. It's about facilitating learning. The trips that I fall, the holes that I see people fall into generally are talking a lot and not facilitating the learning necessarily in the same way, and ignoring the student's ability. And it's almost like a showcase of the teacher rather than about facilitating the learning. It must contain assessment, and we'll touch on that, and forms is a great way of doing that. Linked directly to curriculum, the current curriculum, it must be progressive. And PLCs, I don't know if anybody uses PLCs, but they're an absolute godsend. PLCs are personalized learning checklists. If you think about it as your GCSE specification, and your GCSE specification broken up into bite-sized chunks for students, and they can say whether they understand something or not, as the case may be, so you can make sure that your feedback is entirely pitched appropriately, and addresses the misconceptions rather than re-go over material, which is crucial in this climate where we physically haven't got enough time, especially with year 11s, to go over the same curriculum. So it's about choosing what's relevant and working smarter rather than harder. So synchronous, as I said, that's what I'm going to focus on for the majority of it, because I feel that that's where we get our most gains. EQ asked me to make sure that I mention some top tips with regards safety when you're delivering synchronous lessons. The first thing is to make sure you have a lobby in place. And forgive me for those people who already do this day in, day out. A lobby limits people who aren't from your school getting into the lesson. And believe it or not, I had somebody today who's from a different school trying to get into our maths lessons. So clearly we're doing something really well. But from a safeguarding point of view, it's crucial that there's a lobby in place. And if you don't know how to do that and you use Teams, I'm quite happy to show you at the end. Make sure everybody's muted. Again, in Teams, you can enforce that and then unenforce it as the case may be. When you want them to be discussing particular things, the students to be discussing particular things. I would have your camera on. So I've tried to model that with you now. So you should be able to see the presentation and my particularly disheveled appearance, having just had an external visit all day today. But for the students, it's a little bit more welcoming rather than just a blank PowerPoint presentation. Just a note on that, if you can make sure that you're in a safe communal area, so not bedrooms, and you're careful about what is in your background. For example, if you have a window in your background, it sounds crazy and a little bit stalkerish, but the students will be able to pick up on where you live. So just make sure that wherever you're stationed doesn't have any personal photos. It's blank, and you can blur out your background really quite easily. Your dress code should be appropriate. I don't know if anybody's seen the GIF where somebody's in an online lesson and a student is sat in his desk, the cameras are on, and all of a sudden a naked lady appears at the back. Just make sure that your cameras are there as well, and you're just conscious about making sure that wherever you are is obviously the most appropriate place. Dress code is professional, so no dressing gowns. If you have concerns about behaviour with a particular student, my recommendation would be just to follow your school's policy. Contact the DSL where appropriate. Again, same with poor behaviour. And I would also recommend that you record the lesson. Not only is it beneficial for the students for later, if they want to be able to engage or remember a particular concept, but also it protects you from a safeguarding point of view. So I would certainly recommend that you record the lesson. If there's any other top tips anybody has, please feel free to stick it in the chat, because it would be helpful for other people to chip in there as well. Dual coding. So what I'm going to ask you to do, dual coding, I'm sure you're all over. I'm sure EQ have covered it. So I'm going to organise you into a breakout room. All I want you to do in the breakout room, you've got 3 minutes. And then if you can sum up in no more than 20 words or less, ideally, what dual coding is, that would be tremendously helpful. So I'm going to put you in breakout rooms, 20 words or less. What is dual coding? And then be prepared to put it in the chat. So breakout rooms are going to start in, I'm just going to move one person. Okay, welcome back. For those people who are in, if you, the nominated person in your breakout room, if you could just write in the chat, what is dual coding? That would be really helpful. And we've got, yeah, a little bit of time. Okay, so welcome back to everybody. If in the chat, if you can, the nominated person for your group, if you could just write in what is dual coding in 20 words or less, that would be great. Thank you to Emily, who's ahead of the game. Thank you, Rachel. Combination of words, visuals, pictures, diagrams. Okay. Perfect. And then if we could get some more coming in, that would be great. Dual coding, for those people who don't know or aren't sure, is the principle of trying to not overload working memory. My biggest recommendation for you to do with any remote learning is to keep your presentation as simple as humanly possible. Don't have random pictures on. Make sure that the picture's relevant. Make sure the information is concise. And again, if you're going to be putting writing and visual cues onto the picture as well as verbalizing it, it can be a lot for the students to be able to understand and take on board. So just make sure that your presentations are concise, as simple, and as straightforward. Pictures are a fantastic way of trying to sum something up, sum a particular concept up. Just make sure that they're really relevant, because otherwise working memory gets overloaded. Students can't process information in the way that you want them to, so we'll get confused a lot quicker. So dual coding is the biggest thing I can suggest that you do. Whoever's got the bird, thank you. If you can also see this, if you are on the little link, and I'll send you the presentation, or I'll send it to Krista later, I'll put it in the chat. If you haven't seen the EEF report on effective remote learning or effective learning devices anyway, those are the effect size of particular techniques and strategies that we use. Feedback has the biggest, by far, impact on progress, and the teacher is responsible for it. Instructional quality, so how effectively we can articulate things. Prior cognitive ability, it's no secret that higher ability students do better than lower ability students. Generally, it's their ability to process information and their memory. Direct instruction, we'll talk about slightly later, and ability groupings has very little effect statistically on student outcomes, interestingly. So not that we're going to talk about that particular thing now, but we're going to focus on feedback, and we're going to focus on quality of teaching, purely because those have the biggest influences. This is our model, or this is a model that we use for remote learning. It's based on various principles from Lemov, and we're going to talk about Lemov, Rosenshine, Hattie, and Dylan William. My recommendation for you to have a look at some of the Lemov stuff, because it's fantastic. But essentially, you have an opening slide. So as soon as the students get into the lesson, there's something for them to engage with that's positive. Ideally, from our point of view, it's something based on the previous lesson, the previous topic. So from a retrieval point of view, you're constantly scaffolding their learning and encouraging them to retrieve information from previously. So we have an opening slide that they can engage with. It's generally based on recall. We have reminders and things like make sure you mute your microphone and turn screens off, and the expectations that are particularly relevant. No worries, Paul, I've just seen your message. And then what we do is we use a variety of different things that you would normally see in a good quality lesson. So thinking hard techniques, getting the students to own their own learning. AFL is crucial. So forms, assessment for learning, hands up, things like that are crucial. Modeling. I recommend anybody to have a look at Hattie's work on I do, we do, you do, because that has a tremendous impact on students understanding what they do. Well, I'm not going to cover that necessarily in this one because I'm short of time, but have a look at Hattie. I do, you do, I do, we do, you do, because it's gold dust. Collaboration and how we do that. And then we send the students off, having taught our core material, send the students off for some activities, purely because it's really important for us from a mental health point of view. The students aren't in front of a screen all the time, because it can be a bit much. So then we bring students back at the end of the lesson, conduct low stakes tests, conduct assessments based on what they are supposed to have covered, and do they understand where they are. So that's the basic format of what we do and how we structure it. So assessment and knowledge and recall. You can use a variety of different things, and I'm not going to cover them all because I haven't got time. So we've got things like forms and the use of forms to assess students' understanding. For those that don't know what that is, stay at the end and I'll show you. Hands up, real simple. Emojis, real simple. For example, do you understand what you're supposed to be doing? Put a smiley face in the chat box if you know what you're doing. Low stakes testing is crucial to gauge understanding. This is some work from Lemov, and I'm going to give you a couple of minutes just to sort of process that, because these are his findings on how to make sure that he calls it dissolving the screen. So how we dissolve the screen, make a remote lesson feel normal. These are some of his recommendations. So I'll just give you a minute just to sort of process what they are, and maybe just highlight a couple of them that you think might be particularly relevant for you in your practice. About 20 seconds, and if you could just sort of take it in and just maybe highlight one or two that you think you might want to take forward. Okay, so Lemov talks about things like real-time assessment and the importance of low stakes quizzes in trying to make sure that do we as teachers understand totally the student's understanding. In a normal lesson, all you would do is set an activity, wander around the students, have a look at their books, assess the progress from that point of view, support where appropriately, and deepen their understanding. But now that's gone. We can't do that in the same way. So we've got to be really clever about how we assess students' understanding in the real time. So at the moment, what do they know? Implicit instruction, again, this is the I do, you do, I do, we do, you do. Research shows that if a student knows what their work needs to look like, this is especially for low ability, if they know what their work needs to look like because you've shown them, you've worked them through it, then they're much more likely to get there and to be able to replicate that high quality piece of work. So the I do principle is this is what it looks like. You're not going to talk. I'm going to run you through it. We do is we're going to do it together. So I've seen that done really well by the chat function. So what would we put in this box, and people write in the chat. And then you do is these are a series of questions. You're going to go away and do it. And then I'm going to do some sort of low stakes test at the end. When it talks about allowing time to complete the loop, it talks about, that's what it's talking about with regards you expressing an idea, them going away and doing the idea, trying that particular skill, and then you bringing them back. So Lemov talks quite a lot about how we can make sure that we check for understanding. How we can do it, here's an example of a low stakes test, for example. So what I want you to do, there are 7 questions you can see on the left-hand side of your screen. For those non-biologists, I apologize. But if I just set somebody on a particular activity, this is what I would do and this is how I'd structure it. Right, so you've got 1 minute. No, I'll give you 2 minutes because you seem very nice. 2 minutes. Answer 7 questions, true or false. You don't need to do it in the chat. You just need to do it as a whole. So on your own, 2 minutes. True or false? For those incredibly bright people, there's an extension on the right, so you can sort of see how that would link onto an extension. Okay, about 30 seconds. Paul, I'm so worried about you walking into a poll, so just make sure you're looking up as well.
Definitely thought my camera was off there.
You styled it out, it's fine. I just had a "you've been framed" thing coming into my head, so just be careful.
Thanks for the heads up.
No worries. Okay, so low stakes test. Those are the answers. In the chat box, if you could put in which ones you got right, which ones you got wrong, not the ones you got right. Which ones did you get wrong? Just put number 1 or number 2 or 1 to 7 if you wanted to. But in the chat function, what did you get right? Which ones did you get wrong? Sorry, which ones did you get wrong? It'd be a good idea if everybody can see the chat as well. What you're going to see, and this is an example of how you could do it. Low stakes testing, Lemov's principle is perfect. I can see that generally on the chat, it looks like number 4 people are getting wrong. So from a low stakes test, I now know, scientists, look at Claire, from an assessment for learning point of view, I know as a class we're getting 4 wrong. So I'm going to recover that particular element for 4 or 5 minutes, because that's where the misconceptions are. So when you're doing things like this, the key bit is, what do they not know? What are they getting wrong? Not how many did they get right? Because if you said, write in the chat how many you got right, and you write 6, that doesn't mean anything to me as a teacher. I can't act on it. I can't do anything about it. I just know that some of you have done well and some of you have done poorly. So just think about how you can do real simple low stakes testing like that. Here's another thing that as I've seen done, and I can't remember the research off the top of my head, but a similar sort of principle. You've seen these, I'm sure, in plenaries, but 5 key points. Write it in the chat. What have you learned? What do you now understand? You can use, if you had them live, or you put it into you had paper-based things, write particular pictures or sketches to further illustrate your understanding. So that's called a brain dump. So Amy, you had a question. My year 2 class love this type of closed questioning. If you think the answer is this, put your hands up on your head. That's a good idea. Put your hands on your head. If you think the answer is this, put your hands on your nose. Well done. I always admire you primary school teachers being able to do things like this. Very visual, easy to see. Thank you, Amy. That's great. And anybody who's got any ideas like that, please do exactly what Amy's done and just throw it into the chat. Don't worry, Matthew. So what I'm going to ask you to do in the chat, well, I'm going to give you 1 minute to just reflect on, do you currently do anything to do with recall or low stakes testing within your particular schools that you find really helpful? And then I'm going to put you into a breakout room for no more than sort of 2 or 3 minutes to just ask you to sort of share what you do with regards recall, low stakes testing based on Lemov's principle, just so people can hear different ideas and different perspectives. So 1 minute just to reflect on that, and then I'm going to open the breakout rooms again. Okay, I'm going to open the rooms. Okay, welcome back. For most of you, we're just waiting on a few others. For those that are already here, if you could, this is the next bit of Lemov's research paper, and it looks at teaching in the new normal. So it might be a good idea to sort of just have a read of it while we're waiting for everybody. We've only got 11, 12. So have just a quick look. Okay, we're nearly there. So for those people that have just come back, this is Lemov's take on the surviving the new normal. So if you can just have a read of it while we're just waiting for the last couple of people. Please don't worry about having to try and get all the notes down. I'll email this to Krista and EQ so that you have a copy of it. So yeah, don't worry about trying to sort of scribble and setting your pen alight because you're writing so quick. The important bit for me is I'm sure that you'll know from various pieces of bits of research is that students' attention spans, and even staff, to be fair, students' attention spans when on a piece of equipment like a computer is less than it would be otherwise. So less than when they're looking at a page. All the light affects, the light from the screen affects people's concentration and their ability to take in information. So Lemov talks about the need to make sure that learning is stopped around about every 5 or 10 minutes, just to make sure that we know that the student's attention span is being maximized. So that 5 or 10 minutes isn't that every 5 minutes you're going to set them on a new activity. It's about checking their understanding and do they know what they're doing and how they're doing what they're doing, because otherwise you can lose them for sort of 10 or 15 minutes. So just make sure that short, sharp chunks of information. He talks about feedback loops, and I try to demonstrate that with the low stakes quizzing, the answers, the identification of where people generally were particularly weak, and then addressing that. So with my feedback, so that's effectively closing the feedback loop. And he talks about the need for formative assessment generally. I don't know about you, but breakout rooms in this particular forum are great. They're an absolute godsend. I don't know about your schools, but I know that our students, we're 54% pupil premium, low income backgrounds, quite a lot of poverty. As a result, quite a lot of confidence issues. And if you know Kent, because we're in Kent, it has a grammar system. So the top 20% of intellectual ability goes to the grammar schools, and the rest of the high schools sort of fight for what's left. So from a low ability point of view, low and middle ability point of view, it's really important that we are conscious about that particular timings. We check for understanding regularly, and we make sure that we're maximizing the students' learning and not our talking time. So I'm conscious I've only got about 10 minutes left. You could see on the left-hand side, there are 3 different ways of checking feedback and understanding. Won't have time to be able to show you Spiral. Spiral is absolutely incredible. And it's a really good way, a really interactive way of making sure that students can show their understanding about particular topics. Or particular aspects of their learning. It's like a post-it note sort of activity. So please have a look at that. So when we check for understanding, again, Lemov talks about the importance of cold calling. For those that don't know what cold calling is, it's directed questioning. So you direct the question at somebody rather than openly and then randomly picking on somebody. Direct questioning is you're questioning for a purpose. You're targeting your question at a level, at a student. He talks about pose, pause, pounce, bounce. I think that's the first time I've ever said that without stumbling. Pose, pause, pounce, bounce is you pose the question, you give them 30 seconds before you then pounce on somebody. So that 30 seconds process time is absolutely crucial. And if you're being observed, it's a bottle tester and that 30 seconds seems like an eternity, but please give them 30 seconds to process what you've asked them to do. Pounce on somebody and then bounce it to somebody else. So what that means is if you say to me, if I say, ask a question and I pick on Jonathan, just because you're on my screen, Jonathan, sorry. Jonathan gives me an answer. I might then step the question up from a Bloom's point of view to an analysis type of question to Charlene, for instance, because she's on my screen as well. So that's what the bounce aspect is talking about. Another way of getting around what Lemov talks about with regards collaboration and sharing good practices, and I'm sure that you've seen this in a classroom, is think, pair, share, absolute godsend. So you pose a question, you give them time to think and collaborate with somebody else. So in a normal lesson, you would give them 1 minute like I've done to be able to talk to somebody, bounce an idea off somebody. And then there's almost shared responsibility if you're wrong, which means that there's a confidence with that answer. So if they're wrong, it's not a problem. They can blame the other person. But either way, they're more willing to answer questions if the students have somebody to bounce it off before they actually answer it to a group of you, because they don't want to look like an idiot. So those are sort of real quick examples of what Lemov is talking about. This is Padlet, and I won't show you through Padlet, but Padlet is a collaborative thing. Again, you will see the middle bit talks about Mercutio, and it's an extract from Shakespeare, from Romeo and Juliet. It's an extract about Mercutio, and the activity is that students have to annotate that particular aspect of the book and give their thoughts on it. And you can see on that particular piece of that particular bit, you can see Zach has said this, Saf has said this, Daisy has said this, Tiff has said this. So you can almost get a flavour of what everybody is saying and teach appropriately. In the chat box in a second, I'm going to put a Twiddler. Mentimeter. I'm not going to have time to go through it, but please write down Mentimeter. It's similar to this. It's fantastic. It's a really good way of students collaborating. But in a second, I'm going to open up an app called Twiddler. In the chat, there will be a link. You just need to click on that link. What you will then see is a whiteboard. And the question I'm going to pose you in a minute, I want you to put your understanding down of that particular question. So I'm just going to stop sharing for a second and just get that link and put it in the chat. So just be ready. So Twiddler. So the question, and I'm going to put it in the middle of the whiteboard, so you know what it looks like, and you know how to answer it. So let me just get on this. Right, in the chat, where are we? Chat. Go down to the bottom because there's loads in there. Sorry, chat, right. It's in there. So if you can click on that, and it will take you to a separate web page. I'm going to share my screen so you'll be able to see. But the question is, how many components, sorry, name all the components of fitness. So the beauty of this is I can see loads of people logging on, not just one person. You have a particular limit on how many people can do it, but you can draw on it. You can add things like post-it notes. You can do loads of different things, and you as the teacher can see what everybody's adding. For some of you, it says there's a limit on it, so they're not letting particular people in. So just be aware of that when you're delivering something. And not one of you has answered my question yet. So just be aware of the limit, but that's a fantastic way of collaborating, and it's free. There's absolutely no cost to it. The only downside is you can't see who's written something. So when you're saying to a student, name all the components of fitness, write in the text just who it is, write your name and then write your answer down, and it would help. So I'm going to close that if you don't mind, and then I'm going to jump back. So just go back to the slide. All right, hopefully you can all see that. Excellent. So we talked Twiddler, and it's a really nice way of trying to gauge understanding and get students to collaborate. Padlet, that's an example of Padlet again. So you pose the question. C. Webb is our assistant vice principal in charge of English. She posed the question about why is Eric an important character in the play. Students put their answers down there, and it just shows everybody what their understanding is of particular key topics and helps people collaborate in a really effective way. So Padlet. Right, what I'd like you to do, we're coming to the end and I'm really quite pleased because I'm on 57 minutes past. If you could, just in the chat, well, in the chat in a minute, but I'm going to ask you to just think about the top 3 things that you think that you will take away from this session, and when you will, and how and when you will use them in your next lesson. Once you've reflected on that, write it in the chat, because what it might be is that you have a really good idea. You might not think it, but you might have a really good idea, so that when everybody's reading everybody else's answers, they're going to see, oh yeah, that's a really good idea. I'm going to try that. So 2 minutes, if you can just reflect on what we've talked about, think about something that you're going to, one of them that you're going to put in your next lesson, and then just write it in the chat. I'd again encourage you to write it in the chat, because it's going to be fantastic for people to be able to see and share that practice. Thank you to those that are doing it. If you haven't done it yet, if you could just put it on. If you have done it, if you could just read other people's chat messages, because it might be that you get some really nice ideas. Education reading research room. So thank you. It's gone so quick I can't see who wrote it. Thank you, Paul. Yeah, it might be a good idea for us to check that out, because I haven't heard of that, but it's good to do. Okay, and the very last thing I'm going to say is, if you want some advice on breakout rooms, please stay on. I'm going to stay on for about 10 minutes so you can ask me any questions directly. Not that I'll be able to answer them, but I'll certainly be able to help. The one thing I'd also recommend you do is, on the test recently, they released 13 clever teaching hacks for teams. There's some really interesting things on there. Breakout rooms actually is on one of them. On the breakout rooms front, when I've seen breakout rooms work really well, you've had a leader for that breakout room. So there's a structure to it, so that the leader goes into the breakout room facilitates the answering and the discussion. So when they come back into the actual main meeting or the main lesson, there's somebody who's been responsible for getting answers. Because otherwise, if your school is anything like mine, they will go into the breakout room, be quiet for 2 or 3 minutes, not say anything, and then join back into the main meeting. And then we're tearing our hair out as to why do you not have the right answers. So that's one way we found. So that's it. Yeah, feel free to stay on or just write any questions in the chat, and I'll do my best to help. But apart from that, I don't know if there's anything, Krista, that you need me to do.
Not really. I did write a few questions that came up earlier. If you want me to read them out.
Yes, please, because it might help everybody if you can.
Okay, so one of the persons did ask, what would you recommend for pre-recorded lessons in regards to this? The children are at nursery age.
All right. I mean, my experience with nursery age students is very limited. What I've seen is from nursery sort of age, you have an adult helping, but lots of, I think at that stage, it's just about being very clear with your instructions so that the adult, whoever's next to them, has the ability to be able to answer and support them, and then ask them to be able to submit pictures of their work, so at least you can give feedback on that particular piece of work. Because as the EEF says, the Education Endowment Fund says, feedback is the most important, powerful tool on improving students' learning. And again, I'd strongly recommend, if you want them to be able to do something, give them an idea of what the finished product is and what it looks like. So the Hattie principle about I do, you, I do, we do, you do, because that has been, even at secondary age, that's been an absolute godsend. It's fantastic. Sorry, Krista.
No, no worries. Somebody as well did message earlier that they're a bit confused about some assessment online. If you have any advice on that.
With assessment online,
Mm-hmm.
I would, it depends what they mean by assessment. Are they still in the room?
I'm not actually sure who wrote that.
If you are, feel free to unmute anybody. I mean, regarding assessment, I would use low stakes quizzing all the time. I would have recall quizzes at the start, exit quizzes at the end. But the important thing is it's not assessment for assessment's sake. It's assessment with the view of what do you not know and how are we going to address that. So that's that assessment twinned with feedback. Was there anything else, anybody? Oh, will we get the PowerPoint? Yes, Charlene, I'm going to email it to Krista, because there was quite a lot of information on there. So I'll email it to Krista, and then I imagine EQ will share it with you.
Yep, I will upload it on eTrack in Training Day folder, so everybody will be able to find the recording and the presentation there.
Lovely. Has anybody else got anything? Feel free to unmute. You don't have to write it in the chat if you don't wish. How would you recommend you assess using pre-recorded lessons? Again, I'd have quizzes at the end of each of the lesson. Ideally, those linked to some sort of PLC, so personalized learning checklist, that links to your specification. So you know the specification is this. They need to know this, 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 and this, so that your questions are backed on that. So that by the end of it, if for example, if one of your PLC looks at how comfortable students are with respiration, with human respiration, your 10 questions are focused on human respiration, whatever content is, and then by the end of that 10 questions, you will have an idea about whether people understand it or not understand it. We've got things like a teacher PLC. So we've got, you can't see my screen, I'm pointing at my screen. You've got the students' names, and then you've got all the learning outcomes at the top. So, and it's just ragged, it's red, amber, green. So you can see very clearly which concepts people get, which concepts people don't get. And then you can make sure your teaching addresses those key concepts they don't get. Because in a year's time, you will just do the things that they get. You're just going to do little simple things just to recap them every now and then. Whereas the things that they really don't get, you're going to need to reteach. So with regards pre-recorded lessons, I do the same as recorded lessons. I'd have PLCs, low stakes questioning. No problem. Well, Crystal, listen, I'll send you it in a second so you can send it out. And there was some other, I don't know, I don't know. There was some other little bits that might help. So the fact that you've got some of you still in the room, if you present a presentation, and I didn't know this till the other day, but when you present a presentation, there's a number of buttons that appear on your screen, and one of them is a toggle subtitles. So you should be able to see now subtitles at the bottom of me talking on your screen. So if you've got students who are hard of hearing, it works really, really well because they can read it. Obviously, be aware from a dual coding point of view how much information you're giving them. And if you have a really strong accent, it might make it slightly difficult to pick up. I'm quite lucky. I've been in the South for a while, so it recognises my accent really well. But that's a really easy way of making sure that people can read and understand what you're saying. Okay. Lovely. Well, if there's nothing else, Krista, I'll leave you to it.